of us ever were trained in teaching.
I've always been interested in it, really, under what circumstances will people learn? Well, the first class I taught in women's studies at Minnesota was in 1973, and they'd asked if I would teach this feminist anthropology course, and I said sure, having no idea of what to do. And there were 100 students in the class, and we divided them up into teams, and each with a TA, and they went out and did the research on these topics.
It didn't occur to me to teach like that, yeah.
It was so empowering. These students were so excited to be really doing, it was research, really. And then they had to make presentations to the class, and it was a way of giving their voices real credibility in the classroom. Like, they really were smart, and they really had discovered things that I couldn't possibly have done on my own at that time.
It didn't occur to me to teach like that. One of the first major publications of the American Anthropological Association that Janet got involved in was the curriculum revision materials. The thing was that they were trying to promote a gender-sensitive curriculum in anthropology. They, of course, still had pictures of all women on the cover, so it was, clearly already the association between gender and women was happening. It was Mary Whalen did the curriculum for how to teach archaeology, incorporating some of the new feminist literature, but it didn't talk at all about how to teach. It just was talking again about the sources. What, if I want to teach a course on gender,
right.
But it was never really about changing the way in which people teach and therefore the way in which people learn. And of course, what's I think is fascinating is that the 1984 article and the wedge didn't really have anything at all about practice. Everybody was focused on sort of the gender of the past and the biases and so forth. As we may remember, the way in which we ran the seminar at the Wedge was antithetical to the more masculinist and scientist kinds of, in terms of being much more supportive and drawing people out on their ideas, to the dialogue and the discussion among people who felt comfortable with each other, and wanted to work together towards some sort of goal rather than compete with each other. It was a collaborative learning thing, and we sort of all agreed that that was one of the reasons we got everybody to come to the Wedge was, you were one of the most vocal about it in terms of, I don't know anything, I'm not coming, what can I offer? And so everybody sort of came thinking that we don't know anything. So in some ways that was a great way to start, rather than everybody coming in assuming that we were specialists.
The 1998 SAR, which was engaged with practice, still didn't have anything really about teaching, did it?
No, it didn't. I think it was really when you and I got into team teaching undergraduate courses that this came from that idea, and when we decided we didn't want to be the ones dumping all the information in their empty little heads, then I think it really came out of the goddess class.
Well, they had a goddess, but how do we know that women had power? And it's because
pottery is women's, textile also women's, then household is women's. And the supervising of everything was in women's hands. This is what can we reconstruct from the Neolithic finds. Her body parts like breasts, belly, buttocks, vulva, are the procreative parts of the body. And this shows that she is the creatrix. So I can speak in detail the existence even not of one great goddess or great mother goddess, but about many types of goddesses.
On one end of the spectrum are those who think that what the enterprise is all about is, just taking gender as another variable, without thinking through the implications of it. at all. And then the other end of the spectrum, we're seeing taking issues and concerns of feminism, taking them seriously. And in which case, if one did that, the discipline, the very practice of what everybody does should be transformed.
For people to simply introduce gender without the depth of critique that feminism brings doesn't accomplish what we want to. I hoped people would really puzzle about the way we present the past, because I think the biggest part of feminist archaeology centers on that, the power we have as archaeologists to create images of the past, and that the images we've created have been so problematic. And I liked it that everybody talked about, is this narrative real or not real, or how do you know? And I think that's exactly the conversation that should be had about every piece of archaeological writing. So if it does that, that's great.
It's a vehicle to help teach critical thinking.
Lots of people will say, well, what's so feminist about that? Or, you know, without recognizing that that feminism is not just about gender, it's not just about gender politics in the 21st or 20th century or whatever, but that it actually invokes a whole suite of premises and presumptions, one of which is that it's very much attentive to inequalities of any sort. And when you sort of translate that into everyday practice, there are enormous inequalities when you have traditional teaching methods where one person is, you know, basically telling everybody else what it is that they should learn and not expanding the knowledge base and allowing voices that might not otherwise be heard, you know. You know, the kinds of things that feminists are concerned about, like the diffusion of power, and sort of maximizing heterogeneity rather than looking for the simple answer, and things like that are working against the grain in some ways to what we think traditional pedagogy is all about.
We're very fortunate to have the Maxine Lab available to us. It's constantly busy. This semester alone we have 3 undergraduate courses using it, about 150 students.
One of the things we want to do is try and teach students, both graduates and undergraduates, how to be critical thinkers with images and how to also be authors.
Your eyes simply transmit obtained information. Your mind is the organ that paints the picture of what you see. Cognition is the active process of receiving, exchanging, and reconnecting the sent visual signals. But a mind is shaped by the time and space in which it lives. Cultures categorize their worlds and assign meaning to the objects within it. You see through the filter of your culture. You see through the filter of your time.
It's a very fun place to work in. Students teach each other, faculty learn from the students.
So hopefully we're also trying to use the lab as a way to break away from a kind of model of pedagogy, a kind of model of teaching that characterized most undergraduate education, probably the kind of undergraduate education that the class of '60 had when they were here. And this is called the banking model of pedagogy, which is when the professor stands up and deposits knowledge in the heads of the students in sort of a banking sort of way, and then of course on exams and other sorts of things expects to withdraw that knowledge and get it back out to see whether in fact there was any knowledge that got deposited. We find this to be a sort of old-fashioned kind of pedagogy, and one that doesn't really allow students to become empowered to take charge of their own education and to then be really successful citizens in the world beyond.
These are very new kinds of courses, experimental kinds of courses that teach archaeology, the content of archaeology, through getting students to do their own research projects and then produce multimedia operas almost about their projects. It teaches them to work in teams, small groups, large groups, very important, and it's very creative work. It's a very creative way of teaching archaeological research.
With all the different groups in the class that are giving different presentations, it's really awesome.
I was always uncomfortable personally about issues of authority in the classroom. I was always glad I had early gray hair and I was tall and had a low voice, because I thought it gave me what I needed to have some authority in the classroom, because it didn't come readily to me, that kind of authority, which I think is about, to some extent, about male privilege. And so I got really very interested in what does it take to get good discussion going in a classroom? How do you really get people to be free enough in class to think? Because I never was. I always felt on the spot. I was anxious. In graduate seminars, I could barely speak because I was so worried I would be wrong. So I started teaching as a TA, actually, against that kind of anxiety. And I think that anxiety does come from the power dynamics in the classroom, with the teacher as the authority. So I would always do a lot of what felt like warm-up activities in the class. And watching people have a stake in what was going on in that kind of a classroom setting, I just did that in all the classes I taught, even in big lecture classes, if I could think of ways to do this kind of participatory education or learning.
Rather than me transmit to them information that I know, I want to guide them and coach them into finding things out for themselves, because I think you learn by doing. Research is a kind of practice. It's doing. It's a very active and very creative process. I'm definitely teaching from a feminist perspective on pedagogy, which is intimately connected to a feminist perspective on how knowledge is created and constructed.
Good afternoon, class. Welcome to Anthropology 11-12, Archaeology at Fort Ross. My name is Kent Lightfoot. As many of you may know, I have been part of the archaeological excavation project at Fort Ross for almost 15 years. Antoinette Martinez, Ann M. Schiff, and myself, with the assistance of several Berkeley graduate and undergraduate students, spearheaded the local archaeological site with the intent of learning more about the cultural relationships in this multi-ethnic community. Our initial archaeological efforts at the site were conducted in the summer of 1988, in which we conducted extensive land surveys of the area, and more specifically, the Fort Ross beach site.
February 4, 1831. It's been a while since I've written in my journal, but I have so much new news.
And my goals, I think, for feminist archaeology have always been really ambitious, and it isn't just about giving attention to women or gender, but it's about the transformation of the whole of the discipline in the classroom, in the field, in our publications, in our conferences. I think that there's potential for feminism to change all of that. And I guess what that means is changing the power balance of the discipline.
You don't have to be a female, but you just have to be sympathetic to the kinds of transformative practices that I think have come to embody a certain component of feminist archaeology. And it's just still so exciting and so needed. we showed the multimedia project of Red Remains. I see a student get up and do something like this, and I get up and I say, okay, I can walk out of the room now. I can leave the campus, I can feel like I've done something, or not myself done it, but sort of provided the crucible or the context within which somebody could do something like that. And then you can just say, well, then I feel like I've been a success in life, you know? And that's what some of this kind of co-teaching and feminist pedagogy, where the students actually sort of take control of their own sort of knowledge making and the production of knowledge. And when they can do that, then you can say, okay, now you feel like you've done what you were supposed to, what you set out to do.
I could never imagine teaching in any other way than what I've been doing now.
It was so much more work than any other teaching I'd ever done, ever. It was totally wonderful in the classroom.
It's just so satisfying.
And it was touching. I mean, it was really...
It's just the most incredible creative process that I've ever been in.
Really exciting, but again, it was so empowering.
And I'm exhausted.
Well, to be honest, I think the women's movement saved my life.
I never knew that somebody would have 25 tubes of lipstick.